Thank you so much, Matt. And again, happy Friday, everyone. We're almost at the weekend. I hope you're doing well, that you are safe, and that SEAHO has been a great experience for you all. Today's session is professional development design, and I'm focusing on how to invest in employees. And so if you were not planning to be in the session, you can stay, but we hope that those who are here and who want to learn more about professional development design, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about the reality of what's happening in the world. Where in COVID-19, budgets have impacted a lot of our professional development. But I would even say before COVID-19, we were still trying to understand, what does professional development mean for the individual and for the institution? And so I hope for the next few minutes that you enjoy everything that we share with you, and the conversation doesn't end here. So let's get going. My name is Christian Rafael Suero. I use the pronouns he, him, his. At Mason, I'm an assistant director for staff development, engagement, and onboarding. And that is a very long title just to say I help with professional development and who they are in their roles. I'm also a director for coaching with a nonprofit in Washington, DC. And looking at my involvement in higher education, I am currently on the planning committee for TPE, which is next week, woot woot, as well as I serve on a number of committees with NASPA's national conference. And I'll pass it over to my colleague, Meeghan.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session today. I am Meeghan Milette, Associate Director for Staff Development, Engagement, and Onboarding at George Mason University. Yay! So involvement currently in higher education, not within any roles within any of our professional organizations, but I have presented regionally and nationally on various topics, including second-year experience, gender inclusive housing, as well as professional development and engagement. So really excited to chat with you all today.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Amy Snyder. I'm glad to be here with you today as we kind of, ease into the weekend. I'm the Director of Special Projects for the Division of University Life at George Mason University, which tells you very little about what I do. I work for the Vice President. I'm on University Life Leadership. And one of my consistent responsibilities is professional development for a division of 400 plus staff members, including our graduate assistants. I've been in student affairs for over 24 years and done a number of different roles and responsibilities in various functional areas. And I'm really glad to be with you this morning.
Thank you, Amy and Meeghan. It wouldn't be higher education or student affairs without some learning outcomes and some presentations here and there. And so we have 4 learning outcomes. And the first one is that when we're looking at this workshop and when we're looking at the design we're going to share with you, that you have an opportunity to examine a multi-level, multidisciplinary approach of what we did at George Mason University, which is a large public research institution. We're going to talk about and ensure that you also have an experience in terms of practice development program and initiatives when it comes to professional development design. As much as I love talking about things, I also want to make sure people walk away with something in hand. And so we'll talk about this in the next slide, but we have a workbook for you all that you can download and after today's session, use and maximize. While we are showcasing who we are and what we've done here at George Mason University, you have the opportunity to evaluate us. What makes sense, what doesn't make sense, things and suggestions that you would recommend for us moving forward. And then lastly, as I mentioned this, you will walk away with a product. That is the end goal. Not just us talking at y'all, not just us telling you what you should do. We're going to give you an over 20-page document of this workbook that talks about what does professional development mean for you and thinking about how you can implement this or reimagine at your institution. Which goes to our next slide, which is this workbook. So in a few seconds, I'm going to throw this in the chat. It will be the view option, so you won't be able to edit. You would have to download it as a PDF. But I had the privilege of working with Amy Snyder and doing a 3-part webinar series on this same topic. Now, we only have 50 minutes in this space, and let me be honest, that's not a lot of talking at all, or it could be for some people. And so we want to make sure that you have everything that you need to continue on this conversation if you so choose to. And I'll pass it to Amy.
So we'd like to start with getting a sense of what professional development means to you. And so we'd like to start, it'll help lead us and kind of draw us back to what's a driving force for you to be here today, but also what's happening on your universities. And so if you would take just 20 seconds in the chat feature and answer the first question: what does professional development mean to you? Thank you all. This is really great. Yeah, there's a lot of learning. There's a lot of growth. There's talking about individuals, development of skills and training and opportunities, but focus on a person and not just roles and responsibilities. So that's really useful. And that will be a focus of a lot of what we share today. The other question we'd like to ask, and this may be a little bit different, and it may be the same, depends how you approach it, is what's the purpose of professional development? And so this can be, what does that mean? What's the purpose of professional development, perhaps at your institutions or in your units? This is great. Thank you. Preparing staff and filling gaps, making sure they're best practices and standards, assessing competencies. We're going to talk about that today. Continue to do that great work and new ideas and opportunities and stretching their knowledge to benefit the learners. We will also focus on that today, and those they're working with. It's engagement and learning. This is really great. And Marcus, we wish you well with your defense proposal, and look forward to hearing a lot more about that. That's of course that speaks to us and the work we're doing.
Let me survive these 2 classes this semester, and then we'll take one day and one semester at a time.
You will. I have every faith, every confidence. Send you good vibes.
Thank you.
Good vibes. Solidly abstract. So thank you all for adding this. This is great. And I really feel confident that we'll be able to offer you some tidbits in the short time that we have together. But we also have our workbook. And I can say this now, and we'll say this later, that Christian, Raphael, Meeghan, and I are also very happy to talk, because we're all in this experience together, and sharing information can be really, really useful. And so we really appreciate that. And as we move to our next slide around research and scholarly literature, we did a lot of research when we went into this, of course, and a number of different areas, but we pulled out these 4 pieces in particular. And so we looked at the ACPA and NASPA professional competencies and that whole curriculum. And should anyone wish to do that, they have a curriculum and rubrics and tiered learning and all of that as well. But so does ACUHO-I. I'm so sorry. So does ACUHO-I. The core competencies is built into a whole curriculum, as you all probably know very well. And that body of knowledge is really very useful as we're talking about working with housing and residence life staff and their development. And so that's the direction we went for our design. We use design thinking, and which is very user focused. And so we use that model as we approached our design. And we have a link to a resource in a later slide. And then of course, androgyny is the adult learning theory, and Knowles and a number of other, there's a number of different theories that have come from that original thought. And so we really were very attentive to that and used a NASPA resource around adult learning adult learning theory and adult learning process, and to inform our development as well. And so we'll get into the design. So with our framework and our approach, we decided to approach it in this manner. So, you know, everyone's a little different, but this is how we did it in at Mason and Housing and Residence Life. Our framework was starting with the why. So we kind of like took a page out of the Simon Sinek book, right? And so we start with the why. Why is it important? What do we know? What does our leadership know? What are our colleagues saying? And why should we be inclusive in this framework and process? And so we were really clear about getting underneath that and knowing what that meant, not just to us, but to those we were serving and those who were participating. And when we considered our methods, like how would we inform that design? And so we really did, goes back to that research, and it goes back to the underpinnings of that research and the competencies. And as I said, ACUHO-I core curriculum and the core competencies was really the foundation for our work and informed the design. We assessed those current experiences. And so this is where the design thinking piece comes into play with that first block in design thinking with empathize. And so we said it's really about individuals, much like you said in the chat, is that we need to know not just what it's not about what we think, and it's not only about what leadership thinks, and it's not only about the organization. All of those are important, but what's really important is what do the staff members, what do our colleagues need, and what do they want, and how can we work with all of this together in a synergetic way to synthesize it in a way that would make good sense to the individuals, to their roles and responsibilities, to their professional experience, and serve the organization well as well. So we did, you'll hear us talk a lot about feedback and assessment. And then you have to define who gives the approval, who endorses, where that input comes from, who needs to review it. And so we were very careful, and buy-in comes into play there as well. And then the timeline, we have a timeline for year one. We're currently beginning to plan more intentionally for year two, but we want to share with you a little bit about where we are now on our timeline.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy, for giving us that overview. And so just to share some context about where we were, so let's start some of this timeline discussion. And let's talk about the state of the department. So George Mason University Housing and Residence Life was absolutely primed and ready for this work to actually happen. And so here's some of our, just to give you some institutional context. Not very many people might know a little bit of our fantastic history at George Mason University Housing Residence Life, but we are a department with approximately 150 full-time professional employees. This includes both administrative faculty as well as classified staff, which actually comes into play as we were developing our design approach to our overall professional development framework to have this be inclusive for the entire department. So George Mason is a relatively young university. It's going into its 50th year as a public Research 1 institution. We only recently got that Research 1 designation over the last few years with just our growth and advancement within our academic side of the house. And so our department is even newer than that because we were a privatized housing entity and we got absorbed into the university in 2009. Also to note, during this time, we grew our on-campus population from about 2005 up to 2018. We doubled it we more than doubled it, going from 2,000 students living on campus to now we're at 6,600 living on. And we also opened up our distributed campuses in a regional piece with also having housing there too. So we kept adding on professional positions to fill and address those needs that we had with more students living on campus. So that meant more resident directors. Now we are titled community directors. That meant more staff to fill in those residents education pieces, but we never totally looked at that holistic piece of, we've grown this department so much, how are we adjusting our processes, how are we training our staff, and how are we creating a cohesive unit? And then we started seeing the silo effect that was happening throughout our department and our functional functional areas as development was happening. So we've also, again, as noted here, we've gone through our organizational changes since 2009. We had 4 CHOs during that period of time too. And so that's been, the leadership has shifted quite a bit, which has been very interesting for us. And so that leads us into 2018, our newest CHO, who is actually has gone on to a new venture, came on in with the goal and intent of reorganizing our department. So he did a 90-day stop, listen, learn tour, and that really set the stage for us to engage in professional development work. So he looked at our 7 functional areas and then went through and did that big listen piece to really get that assessment down. So he met with focus groups, he had one-on-one conversations, and then throughout that process, a need was really evolving to have professional development for staff across the board that was identified. And so then the staff development, engagement, and onboarding functional area, we arrived. So it started in 2019. It was just me. I was a standalone shop. And then as the work really started to build out and we were building out our HR functions, it was really seen that it's needed more staff. And so we were able to grow in a really purposeful way that we are able to now really talk through how do we address that gap in professional development and learning throughout the GMU HRL team. So set the stage for that one.
And so now when we started this off, we gave out resources, we asked you what professional development meant, we gave a little bit of context, we talked about competencies in terms of like what we use. Now we're gonna get into like the meat of it, of the sandwich. And so I think what's important is to recognize like what is professional development. And I think many people said this in the chat, it's professional development, but specifically professional development design looks at providing structures and guidance for the betterment of the employee in that institution. And this is through learning and development opportunities. So not just trainings, but workshops, coaching, events and opportunities where people can grow the skills for their job, to do their job well, but then also grow in the talents that they need as individuals. When we're talking about this professional development design, what that really means is thinking about a framework that is inclusive. And you'll hear the word inclusivity a lot in this conversation, but identifying competencies, identifying programs, identifying things that help all our employees grow to be the best professionals they can be. And when we're looking more specifically on professional development design, I think it's important to recognize that depending on your institution, depending on your size, depending on your team, this can all change. But let's be all certain, professional development is important. Professional learning is a value, and we need to make sure we are doing our due diligence, maybe stakeholders or people executing this, to ensure that we are creating the best structure possible. And that kind of goes into like, what is professional development and what is not? And employees just want to have fun. Well, that can be a result of things. That shouldn't be the reason of what's driving your why of professional development. Employees are bored. Sure, that could be a outcome or a side effect of the lack of professional development, but that shouldn't be your why. Or we just want to do programs. That's not really a why, right? So, when we're looking at what could be the why driving your professional development, it could be structurally. I think we shared that we were going through a reorg, and currently there wasn't a structure when it came socially and financially about our professional development. It was, you got this much money, make sure it connects back, have the best of life. It could be that you want to retain your employees and support their ongoing growth within the institution or to their next opportunity. Or I think one that's impacted a lot of us during COVID-19, we need to rethink, reimagine, and restructure how we are being financially responsible with our professional development and learning. And so when you're thinking of your why, when you're thinking of what's motivating your professional development design, think of these core questions, things that may be at the core of your institution that isn't what it should not be, whereas people want to have fun, we should program because X, Y, and Z. So we talked a little bit about the why, or how to find your why. And the next thing was talking about the how. So I think what's important is recognizing you don't need to, people have focused on professional development for years now. You do not have to reinvent the wheel. As much as I like being innovative and creating new things, it's also taxing. But what's equally important is understanding what's already been out there. And so we use the example of ACUHO-I competencies. They're out there, and it actually made our jobs a lot easier because we were able to pull from different areas, from facilities and management to the hall staff, as well as other areas, human resources and leadership. And so for us and for everyone in the space, think about how you're informing your design. What competencies are you going to use, if any? And when you're thinking of what's informing your professional development design, what we did was, one, we selected a competency for us, which was ACUHO-I. NASPA and ACPA, they're great. The need aligned more with ACUHO-I, so that's the ones we chose. We also, when thinking about our how, we thought about where is our institution going? So when it comes to strategic goals as a unit, as a division, making sure that they align to our how and what we were creating. And then lastly, I think, and also most importantly, is when you're thinking about professional development, it should align in some ways with the employee's role, right? Or with the tasks that they're doing. And so ensuring that whatever we created, that there was some standard of practice connecting back to human resources or overall performance management tools. This is my favorite part. This could be the doctoral candidate in me. I don't know why, but I think when we're understanding the what, so what are the employees' experiences, this is the most powerful of, I think, for me, Christian Suero speaking for himself, of the experience, because this is almost informing you what is missing, what are the shared experiences, or what are the takeaways away from the space. And so as Amy shared earlier, and also Meeghan when she was talking about our historical context, for us, we needed to understand what were the current experiences of our employees. And what we did was created space where we could understand that. So what you'll see down here in the slide, we talk about feedback loops and buy-in. And if you ever think about when someone asks you for your opinion, if they're intentional with it, right? If you think of a friend that says, hey, do these pairs of jeans look good at me? Or, hey, I need life advice. You almost feel invested to them, right? You feel like you're part of their situation or part of their chapter. And so we created feedback loops to ensure that our employees understood that we were in it to understand their experience, to help create buy-in. Because you can have the best program design, professional design experience, you can talk about the best competencies in the world, but if people are bought in, they're not going to do it. And that's the hard reality of it. And so people need to feel bought into whatever you're creating, because if they don't, no matter how smart you are, no matter how pretty you are with Canva, they're not going to engage in it. And so what you see here is our first feedback loop was creating focus groups. So we did focus groups based on positionality. So from our graduate assistants to our advancing professionals, our mid-managers, our associate directors, and creating those spaces to ask them what they needed, understood what they were experiencing were with professional development, what was missing, what was needed from day one onboarding to when they were leaving. What we did was, when we held focus groups, we made sure someone on our team was a scribe, took notes, we coded the themes, we heard what they said and shared it back to them. We said, hey, is this what you said? Is this what you meant? This goes back to inclusivity. This goes also into feminist approaches, right? So feminist approaches, making sure people, if you're evaluating or analyzing or studying groups of individuals, that they have a say at the table, so they have the opportunity to say, no, this is not what I said, or yes, this is what I did mean to say. And so keep in mind that here in the second feedback loop was showcasing what they said, but then also creating something where they could say, Christian, Meeghan, Amy, Laren, you heard we created executive summary, looks good, but then what you designed also looked good. This aligned with my interests. And then the third part of the feedback loop, so the first one was focus groups, understanding what people need. The second feedback loop was showing them what we created and also what we took away from their focus group. The third one is assessing the program, right? Does the program and what we created align with learning? Are people taking things away from it? And I think no matter what happens, whether you're the person executing it or supporting or you have it, just remember when you're designing something that impacts so many people, who should provide feedback? Everyone. If multiple people are being impacted, allow those multiple people who are about to be impacted to provide some space of feedback. That's going to create buy-in, and that's going to create a lot of less stress for you when you have to implement things. And I'll pass it to Amy.
So we wanted to take a moment, and we also wanted to show you what some of the deliverables, the work product was as a result of the work that we did, that particularly that Christian Raphael just described. And so, as he said, what we chose was to do focus groups and to follow up with interviews for those who couldn't attend the focus groups. And so we really did look at a qualitative method approach to our research. And so in looking at all of the data after analyzing it, coding it, we created this executive summary, which kind of defined our course and also really represented our findings in those focus groups. I know this is, somewhat small text. I hope you can see it a little bigger on your screen, but you can get a sense of how we described, the focus group, what was happening, what those findings were, who was in attendance. What we're giving you here is the graduate assistant executive summary. And what we chose to do was work in cohorts based on positions. And so you'll see in what we're going to show you in the next few slides that we're going to give you a sample of each of those cohorts, I think. And so this is the graduate assistant executive summary. And so we were able to give you a sense of the sample, but also the findings. What were those key themes? What came out of that? Those key themes that were really important to lead us and be cornerstones in the design of the program for the first year. And what are those next steps? And so this executive summary became part of the feedback loop 2. And I'll show you in a few slides what the second part of that deliverable was for feedback loop 2. But this is the executive summary. So we were able to send this back out to the cohort participants in the focus groups, to the area leadership, to the unit leadership, and be able to get the feedback that we needed, but also demonstrate what the needs were and what the feedback and insights were of the employees that we were serving in that cohort. Thank you. And so then what we then did is we began to form, we began to form these cohorts in a way that gave you a sense of what the themes were, what the competencies, what the needs were based on the feedback that we got, both from the employees and from the area leads. And so this cohort is the advancing professional cohort, or those entry-level staff members to the unit. And so we describe what the program will look like. We said we're going to do this 2 hours in length. There'll be a topic. It will map to the ACUHO-I core competencies. We also have the themes that you can see here that we were able to pull from, that we were able to code and pull from as findings from the focus groups. We determined what those ACUHO-I competencies would be in this first year. And then we have areas of focus that map up to the unit and division strategic plan. And so some of those strategic plan in terms of the unit goals. And so we're able to speak to each of those, and they're all aligned together and fit into one another as we create the whole program. So from the executive summary, from the feedback, we were able to describe the program, the themes, the competencies, and those areas of focus, which will then lead us into the outline of what those sessions began to look like for this cohort. Now keep in mind, it's a year-long cohort, a year-long program based on a cohort of positional leadership. And that's how we determined we would design this part of our professional development framework. The framework's bigger than this, but we're focusing in on this part of it. And so I know this is small too. I hope it's bigger on your screen. This is an example of two session outlines for the assistant director and manager cohort. And so from what we showed you in the executive summary and those findings, and then what we just shared with the cohort description, themes, competencies, areas of focus, we're then able to start to map out each monthly session. So remember, it's the description said 2 hour monthly. We'll focus on cohorts, the themes, areas. And so we're then able to map out what each session will look like for each month based on, and you can see at the top, we have a session goal. We map out the ACUHO-I competencies, the areas of focus, if there's homework, and then we detail the session. It's a session outline by hour. So this session for assistant directors is a 2.5-hour commitment each month. And they're based on different, different themes and different topics. And so the February one was just this morning. And so, it's actually happening right now. So, we have a guest presenter and managing that for us this morning. And so we're able to map that out. And what we did then was we sent the executive summary and we sent this outline to the cohort participants who would be part of this group and who participated in the focus groups and the area leadership to say, is this what you said? Is this what you meant? How does this look to you? What feedback do you have? And how can we modify this before we get this, in play? And so it was another opportunity for investment and ownership and buy-in from both the participants, but also the leadership who would be supporting their staff members engaging in this professional development opportunity. And so this gives you a sense of, once you do all of that, what does it begin to look like month to month in the program?
Thank you, Amy, so much for sharing all that really fun and exciting work. And so I'll highlight, when did this all happen? So as I stated, the reorganization started the process around summer of 2018, but our functional area really wasn't established until May 2019. I was actually holding 2 roles at the same time in our department. I was an assistant director of residence life, managing 2 areas of campus, including like 10 pro staff. We're closing out halls. And then before I was also making this transition over there, but the focus of my work that first year up until really we got to March 2020 was we were building position descriptions. We were reorganizing the department, and I was able to serve in some HR adjacent functions to really prepare us for this overall transition so we could then focus on our team development. And so again, I really consider year 1 completely starting in March 2020, when we were able to onboard Christian Raphael and Laren Garner, who serves as a project specialist, into this functional team. We were then realigned to Amy is my direct supervisor now, just so we could have that direct line to the division level of professional development, because professional development was not a focus within the department. Where it was really focused was by supervisor. So again, we saw pretty large inequities in the development and investment of teams across the board. And so it really created this haves and have-nots feeling within our team. And so this is where, again, we were born out of that space. And one of those pieces that I'm like, oh, I should have mentioned this earlier, with the focus that residence life staff was always provided trainings and things like that, where it was because we had our annual trainings, right? We train every summer, we train in that little 3 days in January before everyone comes on back, and other folks and other members of our team were not feeling that level of investment. However, we also needed to recognize that having standalone training sessions that were really compliance-based was also not professional development. We were giving them trainings to be able to do their jobs. And so this is, again, where we launched out of all this. So then we were able to, so we worked fast and furiously. We had some hyper growth from really March 2020 until going into the fall semester. During the pandemic, I was also out on maternity leave for 4 months during this, and so really leaned into the team as we structured all these pieces, and then we had some really great build out. So we launched a professional development framework by September 2020, recognizing the space that that our staff was in with reopening the halls during COVID, making some pretty big pivots across the board. We really had to adjust and be mindful of when do we actually start our program. So we did our summer trainings, and we worked on a consult basis with our functional areas. So that was in summer 2020. Those were planned, they were executed, they were evaluated. It gave us some great feedback as we're planning ahead for year 2 going on into that. We launched our cohorts starting in September, October. And so again, our cohorts are across the board, from our graduate students, advancing professionals. We also have a cohort for our administrative professionals, so anyone that oversees an administrative process. So we have a really great depth of experience across the board for that team with different professional levels, but again, we have them meeting on a monthly basis, a cohort. Our assistant director team as well, which meeting today, we're able to get those started. And so we were then seeing some really great positive feedback and data from just looking at our our session evaluations that were coming on through when we were doing that. Our graduate assistant academy, which Christian Raphael leads with another assistant director within our team, has had some really great feedback. We also recognize that that is our cohort that was greatly impacted by COVID because we did not engage in any graduate assistant hiring going into this year. So our graduate assistants are all second years. So we will have 100% turnover going into 21, 22. So hip, hip, hoorays. We're excited to see how that goes. But we had some really great feedback and experience from those folks in talking through the preparation, the career development conversations we were able to engage in. Additionally, ongoing programming was one of those pieces where we're looking at how do we provide general trainings for the overall department, also within functional areas. That was one of those pieces that our associate directors, we listened to feedback from our leadership in regards to that. Leadership team refers to our associate directors as well as our CHO, and what they were working with their staff on was that, can we hit a pause on putting on additional training sessions outside of staff meetings and the cohorts because of just time and attention on task when we were doing this great pivoting for COVID. And so we are launching those this spring. So March is when we're starting those up to provide those additional supplemental trainings based upon the ACUHO-I competencies that we identified with the associate directors for their team to benefit their staff going into the upcoming year. We're expanding our work to also include committees. So we have 4 committees that are based within our group that all of us end up chairing in those roles, but they're also, we function those really flat, so they're project-based, and we really have a great sense of ownership and buy-in from our participants on that. And we do have membership that really does span the department. Granted, there is a high focus within our residential communities team because that is a passion area for our staff members, but we really wanted to be inclusive of our departmental committees. And we've also had some really successful programming. So talking about programming on a dime and how do we actually provide innovative programming in an asynchronous nature. We did a really successful pilot of using the Radical Candor podcast called Radical Chats for our new professionals. We piloted with our community directors last summer. We've also expanded that to be offered within the divisional level. And so it allows for a cohort experience. So the podcast are listened to outside of our meeting time, but then we come together to have discussion, really focusing on just that lens of staff management in a different way that we haven't necessarily seen or trained on before. So really great. And now we are doing the assessment overall, and how are we planning for year 2? So we are revisiting our guiding documents. We are building out our overall assessment plan, because that was the part as we were coming together of how do we fully assess our work that we're doing in a way that's meaningful. And so we're now taking it of what's the overall assessment approach to for our cohort experience and building out that so we can continuously grow and improve, because these are not standalone 1-year experiences. And so what does it look like to be in a cohort for a second year, recognizing that we may have job turnover. We do have staff that are searching, which is awesome. We want to prepare our staff to do other things in the future. We want them to move on and evolve in their careers. And so that's also something we're taking into account too for year 2, as well as building out our onboarding process, because we're going to be able to onboard new staff this year. Fingers crossed, all holds. So we'll see. But that's when did it all happen? So we've worked fast and furiously. I am super thankful for my team in the architecting, but also the building out of all these in a really meaningful way, and still maintaining that as we're going forward. We can go to the next slide. And so we just wanted to share our advice on professional development design. It is a fun process. My #1 strength is ideation. So this was like my dream project work, and it was really great to go ahead to ideate, organize, implement. So to actually see something come like from an idea to actual full practice, which is not something that is typical to happen sometimes in working in housing and residence life. I feel like we just start something and the next priority hits. It's been really fulfilling to see that across the board and see how it's morphed and changed and evolved over time. It was great to engage in that experience. So totally see that. And so know that this will change you. It also will really help you to learn about people's journey as we're going on forward on that. Nothing is perfect. We have missed some marks across the board, and that's something that we're adjusting and are planning for year 2. Organization, lean into your folks that have that as a top strength, and you will become more organized. Speaking from my own personal experience on that one, I've learned quite a bit from my arranger colleague of Christian Raphael. Utilize your colleagues' strengths, not only within your department, but who do you have in your division to support you in this work as we're moving forward on it. Be nimble. If anything, the biggest lesson of the last year is that we have to shift and change and evolve with what's what's happening within the world, within our institutions, with our students and our staff as well. So how are we valuing that staff experience? So it's okay that things change. They should change because we have to adapt to the changing environments that we live in. And know your team, know their language, know their challenges, successes. It makes things a lot easier, and also making sure that you have all those pieces to build on it as you're going forward on it will help to inform that. And now we're going to check in on some resources, because that's one of the big parts of going into all of this. So did I talk through all those? Yeah, we can stick over to the next slide. Yeah. Of how do we make this practical? Drives me nuts when I attend a presentation. I'm just like, what did you use and what can I take with me? So here's what we used. Just to let folks know, Eracy is something that's a project management tool that for us has helped us to align what our large projects are in a really easy table manner. So please check out our resources that we're talking through that we're showing here. You can check those out on your own time. Accountability partners is something that we're really looking at, of how we are being accountable to the work that we're doing. We also, we had a really great experience with the program design school. So shout out to that program. Was really beneficial for Christian, Raphael, Amy, and I to attend. And that's really aided us in our build out of facilitation guides and how do we produce really good part for folks going on through this. And so other parts that we talk through are included in this. So please utilize those. We want to share the good work. We also know that it's sometimes hard to build from, you don't need to build from scratch on here. I'm glad that we could do some heavy lifting on all this to support you in your development with your teams, or even for yourself as you're going forward on this.
Thank you, Meeghan. I know we only have a few minutes, and I just want to make sure everyone knows what I'm sending them, so they're not like, what is this link that I'm just showing up in my chat? And so kind of like what we shared in our resource slide, but also what people have been sending is the link to the Canvas, but also a PDF of our professional development design workbook. And so this is what we use for NASPA and sharing with you all. And it goes into more detailed everything that we did. And so as Amy shared when she was talking about the why, so like, why does this matter? Why are we doing this? The how are we informing our practice? The what is the current employee experience, and et cetera. We go in larger in depth about all those areas and give explanations, definitions, and there's even activities for you to fill out. So again, we know we only had like 50 minutes, and so we wanted to give you this product as well to make it more holistic. And so with that, we have like 8 minutes, maybe less for questions.
Great job, everybody. So well done on your presentation. Just a quick question from when Christian was talking about your focus groups, and you separated your GAs, your coordinators, your assistant directors, your associate director. Did you have everyone at the same time, like a group of 7, but it was a mix of GAs, coordinators, or did you separate them out in regards to their level? So the coordinators were in one group and so forth.
Great question, Marcus. Yeah, we separate them out by positionality, because the one thing we want to be mindful of is like, well, I think I'm a great supervisor. I may not be to my supervisee. And so we didn't want to have supervisors and supervisees in the same space, knowing that professional development can be so tied to supervisors at times. And so by creating that separate spacing of positionality, so GAs, advancing professionals, coordinators, and et cetera, try to create more of a brave space for folks to really talk about their experiences in professional development.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And will you also be able to email us your presentation, or how we can get a copy of your presentation, if that's an option?
Yeah, I think I can.
This presentation is also being recorded, and so it'll be on the SEAHO YouTube page as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
In the line of focus groups, I just want to toss in that we didn't really fully touch on is our maintenance and facilities teams has been going through a reorganization as well as we're going through that. So we did take time to work with our housekeeping staff, which is our custodial division within our department, as well as working with their leader, like their team leads, as well as we're building out their professional development design. But that has been a little bit more on a pause with that to fully accommodate them, recognizing that there are larger pieces at play within that scope of the department. Just as a quick shout out to that one.
So it looks like there's a question about, in order, the question, can you tell us more about the assessment that you have done? Amy, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the question is about the assessment, the assessment we've done. So So after the focus groups, I'm assuming that we're talking about the assessment. We're done session assessments after each one. We have, it's just a 5 or 6 item session evaluation so that we get at the heart of what we really want to know. Is it useful? Are there things that they can apply? Are they getting to connect with their colleagues? So we're really speaking to the overall learning outcomes, but also the usefulness of it, because we heard that over and over in our focus groups. And so the session evaluations are meant to be kind of a 2-minute check-in after each monthly session. And then we're building our program, overarching year 1 program assessment to be able to do that survey at the end of the year in May. We're also working on considering a summer, we're in consideration of building a summer assessment plan that would include more qualitative methods as well, to get back into that focus group and say, what were we able to accomplish? What are the needs? What are the areas of interest? What are the gaps that still exist? Because, as Meeghan mentioned earlier, the CHO who was with us, that was really the champion of professional development and engagement and personal development and enrichment, has moved on to another opportunity this fall. And so we'll be, there'll be a new CHO here in short order. And so how do we, the organization is still changing, and there's still some things that are in flux, and so, it's still yet to be determined. And so, that also creates some questions and vulnerability and some needs that we'll need to address. And so being able to do some qualitative analysis too will be really helpful. So we're working on looking at that plan as well. Does that answer I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and then the second question came up was, who did we share the assessment stuff with, information and data with? So for focus groups, kind of like what we shared with them our executive summary and the themes we've pulled and found. And then in terms of like our assessment report, we'll do an annual one. And so we did like mid-semester report. And so in terms of the assessment that we've done, the goal would be to do an annual report of the themes and what we found, which is also good for leadership, so they know we are of value and important to them.
We're very fortunate that we get pretty honest feedback in an ongoing way. So it's really great that we get that anecdotally, but to also be able to have some data to add to that I think is really useful for leadership as well.
You all did a phenomenal job on taking the time to do this, and we have a large department. Besides doing this study that you conducted, do you also supervise staff, work with communities, other committee roles? I'm just trying to think of the time that you all had, along with your other responsibilities with your positions, and how you maintain that.
Yeah, it was pretty, so I think recognizing our privilege that we have a team dedicated to this. So if someone does not have a team, it's going to be challenging, right? But what I would say, and I would love to hear from like Meeghan and Amy from their perspective, is once we had our plan and our timeline of like how we were going to do things and how we had the archetype, we made sure that came first, and then everything else came afterwards. So I don't need to be on every committee until I have to be, right? And so this came first. None of us work specifically with the halls, but we do have work that may be like HR adjacent. So Amy and Meeghan work closely with the student affairs overarching university that have other ties and commitments too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I might add, Marcus, is that improving the staff experience is one of our strategic goals in our Division of Student Affairs. And so we just started our new strategic plan, and Meeghan and I are actually leading that strategic action around a professional development framework. And so to be able, and so we have shared service model in our Division of Student Affairs around some of those centralized services. So, human resources, technology, professional development. And so Meeghan and the team also work with the Division of Student Affairs on some initiatives as well. And so because I'm the only person and it's a part of my job, and so we rely on a lot of volunteers to make a lot of really great things happen in the division. And so we'll be working on this effort in the larger Division of Student Affairs starting in March. Meeghan and I, with this team of volunteers, that will really have to negotiate that, and more so because there is no one really in these units that have professional development full-time in their job other than, Christian, Raphael, and Meeghan and Laren. And so it's an interesting tension, I know. But people I've found in my work want to do this good work and want to do it if they're able to. So it just, depends on bandwidth and less on interest.
I was going to echo what Amy said, but I was going to mention committee work and the staff that you have that are dedicated and want to do this project-based work in your committees, and setting them up in a structure that is really, that gives them tangible tasks to work on. Because that's the other part, is sometimes we get into committees and we don't set what's the timeline, what are the expectations, and how do we do this work? And so being on divisional committees as well as some internally in the department, that has been the approach that we've taken, and we've seen a really great yield on the projects that people are able to invest in. And we're also looking at it as a resume builder for them, and how they're able to showcase that in their growth and professional development. I also wanted to highlight a question that Jessica put in the chat about asking about buy-in. And so I think that we met with some buy-in issues at the beginning of talking through what is the bandwidth that our staff has. But we were able to showcase it in a way that really, that was able to demonstrate the benefit that they were going to walk away with the learning outcomes that we had. What are those practical pieces that they could put in place? And also knowing that there is a level of fatigue. So we understand when people aren't able to attend a meeting. We also understand when we have folks that have to jump off a meeting because they're attending to something else. We have a lot of staff members right now that are managing different issues within their halls. And that's something that we've been mindful of. That's also interplayed with some of our work with our facilities teams of they cannot add another piece onto their plate as they're still navigating our new standards of cleaning, our new standards of service that we're providing when we're doing maintenance follow-ups. And so we're really trying to be conscious of that, but the staff is there to buy into it. But we're now looking at the future of how do we navigate creating experiences that are asynchronous in nature, that still have meaning and value, and bringing those back to the space to allow for not just another meeting on a calendar, and navigating that.